Hi, everyone. This is Jackson Steger, and you're listening to Campfire, a limited series podcast from Cabin. Campfire is a show that seeks to understand how decentralized organizations achieve wildly ambitious and creative goals. Each week, we're joined by DAO leaders and operators who share the tips, tricks, and tactics that they have used to build community and ship product. Today's guest is Richie Bonilla, founder and CEO of Clarity. Clarity is not actually a DAO. They describe themselves as a workplace for decentralized teams. You can think of the tool kind of like GitHub for non-technical workers. And our conversation today is about DAO tools, which have come up a few times on this podcast, but we've not gone super deep on any yet. And as such, we start by trying to understand what exactly a DAO tool is, who are the persona that Clarity specifically is building for, and we also chat about the DAO ecosystem more broadly, including what green flags that Richie looks for in a community. Cabin, who produces this podcast, uses Clarity to manage our bounties and to get work done. And if you're interested in testing the tool for yourself, you can visit clarity.so. Thanks. Richie Bonilla, welcome to Campfire.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So in a few episodes now with Julia Lipton from DAO Masters and with Jess Loss and Nicole from Seed Club, we've talked here and there about DAO tools and how they're getting a bad rep across the ecosystem because so many folks are aspiring to build DAO tools as opposed to actually building DAOs, and that the space is just generally really early. So do you agree with that? Do you think that DAO tools get a bad rep, and is DAO tools even like the right language to be using to think about some of these products?
I definitely understand the bad rap. I understand it. I think there's a lot of folks, like you said, jumping into the space to build DAO tools because it's the new B2B SaaS, and it is not, to be clear. But that is like the perception often.
When you say the new B2B SaaS, just for folks who maybe don't come from venture or who are less like in tech, what does that mean? Like, why do you say that?
B2B SaaS is a great category to be in, right? Recurring revenue, customers with deep pockets. It's a great, if you're a founder, you want to, B2B SaaS is a great category. And I think that, there's a whole new group of customers with a new set of problems, but with with what people think is like a lot of the same problems of B2B SaaS. It's like a new start, right? So it's an opportunity for people who maybe tried something in B2B SaaS or always wanted to now come in and think that, this is their chance to build like B2B SaaS tools, or maybe had something that didn't work in B2B SaaS, like in like Web 2. And now they're saying, it'll work in Web 3. So I think that there's enough of that I understand the bad rap that the category gets.
And so, Richie, what exactly does it mean for something to be a DAO tool?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been thinking about this lately, and the term itself is funny to me because I just think we're building tools for DAOs. It's okay, what is a DAO? It's this new kind of organization, right? As like the simplest possible way of saying it. Okay, well then if it's the new, then the previous kind of organization is like a corporation or a business. So the corollary is something like, I build business tools. And when you say it that way, it just sounds really silly. And so, that doesn't really make any sense. If you build business tools, the next question is, who do you build them for? Like the salespeople in the business, or the customer success department? Who do you build for? Are you building for designers? These are clearly very different things. And so I spend a lot of time thinking through, like, if you're building DAO tools, what are the personas in a DAO, right? And how is it different from the personas in a business or a corporation? And really, I came down to these three macro personas, which is not new. A lot of people have said it. You have users, you've got owners, and you've got contributors. And I think that the popular thing about DAOs is that, now these are all the same people. Owners are contributors and users are owners. And it's really cool that now there's like this mix. But I think that even though these three, let's call them like sub-communities within the bigger community of the DAO overlap, they still have unique interests within the macro community of the DAO. And so you have to think about, when someone's acting as a contributor, what jobs are they trying to do? How do we help them do those things? And even within contributor, there's a lot of different kinds of contributor, and what problems do they have? So I think that when you start to smash users, owners, and contributors and trying to build tools for the whole set at once, it's just bound to not be a great product. You just can't do that. And we see this with like Discord, for example. it's a great tool for user communities or fan communities. And you can see that because you can come in, you can hang out. It doesn't really matter what was happening before you got there. And then when you enjoy the moment, when you leave, it doesn't really matter what was happening after. You just vibe and hang out. And it's great at that. But then all of a sudden, as a contributor, it matters what happened before and it matters what happens after. And you're expected to keep tabs on that, and your reputation and your compensation opportunities rely on your ability to keep up with that. And the tool's just not made for that. So it's an example of like your fan or user community has a tool, and now your contributor community is expected to use the same tool, and that causes the contributor community a ton of headache, right? So that's just one example that's very legible to us of how building for different personas would affect the user experience of a product.
So I definitely want to come back to these different user personas, and I think that framework of owners, contributors, and users is really helpful. And I want to come back to those, and I want to come back to the different jobs to be done at each of those levels. But before we do that, would love to just give you a chance to talk a little bit about Clarity. So curious to know first, what is Clarity? And then also what inspired you to build it, given everything you just said about some folks being in the space just because they perceive it as this B2B SaaS play?
Yeah, we think of Clarity as the contributor community hub and for your DAO. And so we're specifically focused on that contributor community. And it's a place where your DAOs can align, onboard, and reward those contributors. It's the single space for your entire contributor lifecycle. And this takes form as a place where you can send a new contributor to find out all the different ways to contribute by using like the home page of your base. And you can also have projects and tasks in there where they can identify contribution opportunities in the form of bounties or goals that they can design their own contribution opportunities around. You've also got a wiki for the community, which serves as a library for the community where you can go to find information that might help you with your contributions or discover work that's been done before on that topic. And then finally, you just have general working notes that you can create documents for in order to just get on the same page for a meeting or maybe a drafting a proposal. We have people who use it for drafting articles before they publish them, for example. So there's various ways you can use the product, but all focused on the work that the DAO is doing, the contributor community and the DAO is doing to create whatever the DAO creates or coordinates or produces.
What motivated you to build this as opposed to just letting DAOs lean on some of the other business tools that are already out there?
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey for us. I was a freelancer for many years, and the freelancing is amazing because you get to have a lot of freedom. And you can live whatever lifestyle you want. I love being location independent, traveling around. And it can be quite lucrative once you get started, once you get established, but it's actually extremely lonely. And it's also very risky. And I had tried my hand at starting a startup. We had built some pro tools in the early Airbnb ecosystem. I had to leave that, sort of had to restart. And it was an incredibly lonely experience, even though I was freelancing and like doing a lot of work that I loved. And then I ended up taking a contract job at Techstars where there was for their blockchain accelerator. And that's how I got into Web3. And so I was like the design associate for the blockchain accelerator. And after the accelerator, I spent a lot of time with companies, which was a NFT game studio. And they had this like bustling community of people in a Discord server. First time I had encountered that kind of community. And it was really interesting because you had all of these contributors. Now I was a contributor in this community. And because they were solving puzzles and they were playing these games and winning tokens, they then would start to create new puzzles and games that included those tokens. And so you had this interesting thing where we were all technically freelancers who are not usually going to play repeated games with each other. Usually if you work with the freelancers, they do it once and then disbands. There's no reason to work together again. But now because we all have shared ownership over this like game universe, we're playing these repeated games with one another. And now you're starting to say, I actually do need that information from the previous project that we did, or we have to actually coordinate this, and who's actually been around for a while, what have they done? You start to ask these questions, and there was like no way of doing that. And I had a system that I had previously used for my remote startup, and I brought that into the community, started to run the system manually, but I was doing all that in between work, and I was saying, hey, I wonder if we created software that could sort of hold the line on a lot of these pieces, then we could start creating legibility that I had as a technical contributor or technical freelancer with GitHub. So I thought, like, where's the GitHub for non-code contributors? And so that was the original inspiration, was the technical contributors. Whenever I contribute technically as a coder, I have GitHub. And then when I go over here, I have Google Docs, and we're like slinging tasks back and forth in Trello. It's like not anywhere near the same experience and not anywhere near the same legibility of contribution after to show what I've done. And so that was the original inspiration, was like, hey, let's take this system that I developed at this remote startup. Let's try to turn it into software and see if we can create something like that for non-technical contributors to have a GitHub style platform to work together.
I love that framing as a GitHub style platform. I think that I hadn't heard that before, despite having spent a lot of time in Clarity. Kudos to that phrase. I think it will serve you well. Speaking of using comparisons as a helpful tool for helping to understand new things, when I had Jess and Nicole on, the very first question I asked them was, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you agree with the following statement that Seed Club is the Y Combinator for Web3? And I'm going to ask you a similar question, which is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you agree with the following statement, Clarity is Notion for Web3?
That's pretty low on that scale, honestly, like really low. I don't think that we play a similar role as Notion at all, actually. Notion is a flexible tool that is focused mostly on creating static wikis, that is shoehorned into doing things, project management, but has no formal feature set for doing that. And I think the comparison is easy to make because of the form factor. And I understand that, like, it's clear. But I think that I think GitHub is really similar from a functional standpoint, from a role within the community standpoint. That is really the similar job being done. Whereas I don't see Notion doing that job, or trying to even.
Super valid argument. And again, love the GitHub comparison. On this idea of the form factor being similar, the reason why I say that is because I find both Notion and Clarity to be very composable. And composability is this broader topic that gets discussed a bunch within Web3 and within blockchains. So moving past now Notion, forget it. I just want to talk about composability. And in the broader Web3 ecosystem, just for our listeners, because we haven't really talked about this idea before, what is composability and why does it matter?
Yeah, so composability to me is where the output of one system becomes the input to another system. And we should design our tools in such a way that we are writing to standards and we are accepting standards, right? So for example, you could look at token gating, for example. It's like really great example of composability. Applications and platforms create NFTs, for example, and then other applications and platforms accept those NFTs as inputs to produce functionality. And they don't have to talk to those other platforms in order to create that integration. They just agree to the standard and they adhere to the standard, and so it works. So to me, that's composability and what it enables.
Cool. Given all of this context on the goals of Clarity to align, to onboard, to award, and how the tool is designed to be composable in the same way that I think a lot of Web3 elements are, I'm curious, what will the future look like in 10 years if you're wildly successful in building Clarity, presuming, of course, that you're only probably going to reach that wild level of success if the user base that you're selling to also has similar levels of success?
Yeah, definitely. This was a question we get a lot. I mean, still get it, which is, do you think DAOs are going to? And I think that I'd rather be on the field making it happen than on the sidelines waiting to see if it's going to happen. And so I think they're going to make it because I'm out here working my hardest every day to help build stuff that I think helps them work out. And I think that if we're successful, what I'm most excited about is not just me being successful or Clarity being successful, but the entire ecosystem, is that I think we make working on the internet accessible to everyone. And that's what we're really excited about. And we think that if we are able to build a really accessible UX for contributing to DAOs, that opens up the set of people who are able to become contributors. And I think that's going back to my personal experience as a freelancer, it's like having a ton of leverage in your work because you can do it from anywhere, because you can access the global opportunity pool, because you can develop whatever skills you're most passionate about. You have a lot of leverage and you have a lot of freedom, and then you end up just living a more three-dimensionally fulfilling life in all aspects of your life. And I think that that's a really exciting thing. But I've seen a lot of folks that want to do that, but then are unable to because of the loneliness, because of the risk of starting that. And to just connect the dots with what I was talking about earlier, like these communities for me were huge because I was super lonely as a freelancer, but now I was working in community and this was amazing. And I realized that I never had to look for work anymore because like work would just come through the network. And I was like, this is something else. Like, what is going on here? But there just wasn't that many examples of those kinds of communities. And so we had a very winding path until last year. I had some friends telling me, like, I think you're building for DAOs. And I was like, I don't know. DAOs are like this esoteric, like governance thing. Like, I don't know. Like that was my impression back from 2018. And I'm saying we're building for these productive communities that they have a lot of freelancers and liquid talent, and they have tokens because they co-own the game universes and things like that. And they're like, yeah, it's called a DAO. You should really look into this. And so I think that, just to bring it back, to be successful here is to make that experience of contribution just more accessible to everyone, anyone who can feasibly work on the internet.
I love that mission. And given that's what you said in response to the tenure question, curious how both we as the ecosystem, but also you as Clarity get there. What's the 1 to 3 year roadmap? What are some shorter term milestones or goals that you feel, answer it either or both ways, that the ecosystem or Clarity needs to hit for that to be achievable?
Yeah. So when you think about composability and you think about just like contributing to the ecosystem, right? Those are obviously two really interlinked concepts. And I've been thinking a lot about how if you are transforming data in your tool, and that data is supposed to be consumed by other tools or other platforms, then what is the value in the data that you are producing and in the way that you're transforming it? And I realized that Clarity's role here is to be an oracle for contribution metadata. So if we create the most accessible UX for coordinating contribution, then we're able to tell you what happened when those contributions were done. And we can actually then become a record for that. And we can write that record to portable formats that are then able to be consumed by other tools or other systems. So for example, feeding your contribution metadata into a badging system to back badges that you're issued, or a reputation algorithm, or something else like displaying your particular type of contribution on a certain kind of profile that was made by designers for making their specific type of contribution legible. My work history on LinkedIn always looked super lame because I was a freelancer for so long and I had to make everything a position. It doesn't make any sense. But if I could take that same data and have it backed and all of those endorsements all back it and put it in a profile that was made for my style of work, it would have looked way better. And I think that that's the kind of thing that can be possible if we produce and become a trusted oracle of that kind of data.
Yeah, you stole a question I was going to ask. The question was going to be, how do we make things like identity and reputation portable? You tweeted semi-recently this idea that there won't be a Web3 social network because Web3 is the social network. Social will be embedded into every product we use because reputation and identity is portable. So I guess to follow up on the question I never get asked is, how will that look tactically to a user? How will they observe? You mentioned these badges that an analog that John Hillis from Cabin has used is like Boy Scout badges or Girl Scout badges. And I like that a lot, but that's more on the reputation side. What about identity? What would it look like to someone to log in or to view someone else's identity and reputation?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that you have to rely on the imagination of people who are going to create those front ends. And I think that when the data is available and portable, the barrier to entry to creating something as simple as a profile becomes really low. If you want to create a new work history profile and you try scraping LinkedIn, they have bots that will find the out and they will ban you for doing that. I know because I was almost banned from LinkedIn for doing this. And that's because their moat is in their profile. They know that all the value has to accrue to the profile. They put all the SEO on the profile and everything. But when that data is portable, the profile itself isn't the moat anymore. And so what that means is that now we can all create our own profile because it's just about coding up a new front end and designing it. The data's already there. You don't have to also go and create a growth engine to funnel people through some kind of UX that then produces the exhaust that then fills a profile. You can just create the profile and show the data how you want. And so I think that there's just like a wider diversity of ways of representing your contributions. And because of DAOs and because of what they are and how much more diverse the landscape is than corporations, you have a wider range of types of contribution to be represented. It's not just all 9 to 5 jobs that you do for 1 to 3 years at a time. And then you just show that on a linear time. Like maybe there's other ways of representing the multifaceted identity that is you that's actually makes that you're way more proud of, or that's more appropriate for a certain opportunity or a certain thing that you're trying to accomplish. And I think that's the difference, is that you don't have this one Facebook profile or Instagram profile. And sure, we don't have one right now, but we have what, 5? Right? What if there were 500? What would that look like? I think that's the difference, is like we don't just have this small set of ways of being represented online.
So great answer. There's almost this choose your own way of representation that you want to have as a user and an owner and a contributor in the space. And to this note, this idea of choosing your own, I want to actually revert back to some of the jobs to be done that Clarity's thinking about when it comes to aligning and onboarding and awarding, and specifically talk about onboarding for a second. So how should onboarding be designed in DAOs? Is there an ideal pathway or not? If yes, what is it? If not, why not? And I ask this in the context of what we were just talking about, because at Cabin, we very much view onboarding as choose your own adventure. And I'm curious how much you're aligned with that.
I think that the beauty of this is that we get to choose what is right for our communities. When we think about building tools for this part of the problem or for these jobs to be done, we think about, well, how do we just create structure that you can fill in with content and not create if we started to create onboarding pathways that had forks and certain things, and we would start to determine the ways in which you can onboard. I don't think that's our role. I think our role is just to provide you with like a loose enough framework that you can then fill in with your own pathways. So if Cabin wants to have a very choose your own adventure style onboarding, then they can do that. And if someone else wants to funnel everybody into one Airtable form where they fill it out and then they get basically curated into different pathways, and then those are run differently, which I just talked to a DAOer today about. That's how they do it in their community. And I think that you should be able to do both. So when I think about it, I think of like, how do we put things front and center so that when you show up to your Clarity base, you see the things that a new person should see. And then beyond that, you sort of fill it in.
Love it. So continuing then down to the list of jobs to be done, and specifically ones that Clarity helps with. How should awards work in contributor compensation in DAOs?
Well, isn't that the most loaded question of all time, right? I would say this. I would say our role in that is to make contributions legible so that you can make a case for yourself. And each DAO will have a way that they evaluate or add meaning to that or interpret it. And maybe they reward certain types of contribution and not others, which is most likely the case. Or they have a certain need at a certain time. Maybe we have a lot of IC style contributors. Right now we need a leader who's going to rally the troops towards a certain outcome. So we're rewarding that right now more than other things. And so for us, for example, we did this experiment where with permission, we took some of Cabin's contribution data, and we just took a very simple sample set of 550 tasks that had been closed since October, and it's now May. So it's quite a few. And then we just said, look, what happens if we put this into a force graph? What would we see? Could we identify the linchpin contributors? And so we did this. I worked with David Vargas on it. He's awesome. Who's also in Cabin. And he did it. And the first version of it that came right out of the vanilla settings was a network of people where you could clearly see that there were like 3 people who basically were involved in a lot of the contributions. And so you saw that Zach, Roxine, and Ali were involved in many contributions. And when I showed Zach the graph, he said, oh, you know what? This cluster over here, that's the media guild. And like this cluster over here, that's the product guild. And so you could actually see the emergent structure of that. And now that's something where, some contributor who's maybe on the perimeter could actually say, hey, look, that's me. Here are all the people that I've worked with here. First of all, if you want to talk to them about how I've been working, that's a great place to go. And then also look at how involved I've been and all of that. And that can be a part of the case that you use to advocate for yourself when you propose a role or compensation or some other kind of leveling within the community. And so I think that's our job, is to make things legible. The meaning comes from the community.
So as we approach close, I want to move on from Clarity and just leverage your experience observing so many different communities in the ecosystem. And I know you were recently at DAO Camp with a lot of other beat builders and leaders in the space. What were some green flags that you notice in communities or that you look for, whether it's in the community itself or maybe just in the leaders and founders that are starting them?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm really sensitive to language. And so the things that I look for is like, how do people talk about their relationship to the DAO or the relationship amongst contributors or amongst community members more broadly? How do they talk about token holders? When I hear people say things like, I'm a facilitator, or a DAO that I'm involved with, they talk about it as if the thing is bigger than themselves and that they are merely a part of it. Even if they're playing a linchpin role, that's a green flag to me. It's, you're coming at this from the right mentality. Like, you realize that it's bigger than you. It's a community. We're trying to sort of persuade people to work together towards a common goal by articulating a vision of the future that is compelling, not force people to work together through coercion and accountability, because the latter is your corporation style management. And so like when I hear things like management or my DAO or can you believe they bought the token at this price, almost like they got one over on them, that to me is more red flag territory, where it's you're managing it. It's really just a startup that you perceive yourself as a founder who's like running the thing or managing it. I think that's where I start to be more red flag territory.
So one of my green flags, just for my last question here, not just in DAOs, but in, I would say, across tech, is I really like and respect and believe in optimists. And you are a self-described optimist. And I noticed that just not just on this call, but throughout all of your online interactions and in your calls with the Kavin community. I'm curious why you might think that optimism is important for building new models of work or building for the future more generally.
Yeah, I think that there's good optimism and then there's less good optimism, right? Optimism doesn't mean we assume that everything is going to go well. And it doesn't mean that we assume that everyone's going to act in the best way for everyone. But I do think that optimism for me is that I believe the net result will be good. If our heart's in the right place and we try our best and we do take into account a diverse range of perspectives, that we can do it and that there's a brighter future ahead and that this might be one of the best times to be alive and that we can make it better. To me, that's not a popular or fashionable perspective as of late. And I've just realized that was not so. And so I figured, why not just say I'm an optimist, because then I can find other optimists and we could work together on stuff. And I think that'd be great. But I do think that where optimist gets a bad name is when people think, we're going to build this thing and it's all going to go great. And so they actually don't even think about how it could go poorly. And then they don't build for that, or they don't design for the bad case. And I think that's where optimism gets a bad name, because it's conflated with blissful ignorance or willful ignorance. And I think I think we do need to guard against that. But I do think it's net positive to be optimistic.
Very balanced and tempered answer. I am optimistic about Clarity's future, your future, the ecosystem's future. So thanks so much for coming on the show, Richie. Where can people go to find out more about Clarity if they haven't already?
Yeah, I'd say our Twitter account @ClarityTeams is the best place to find the latest. We also have our website, www.clarity.so, and that will be the best place to keep up with us. We have a weekly newsletter that people say keeps them in the loop. And so I encourage you to follow along there as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Richie.
Thank you.